Okay, hi everyone. So okay, sorry, my feed froze there. Okay, what I'm going to do is go through A Streetcar Named Desire with you up to Act Five. I'm actually filming this on Monday. I'm going to put it for an upload on Tuesday um, because I know that a lot of you are probably still working on um, the importance of being earnest and those assignments, and that's fine. It's just I had some time now that I'm going to use to go ahead and make this lecture. Um, um, so again, here's where I come in at a little bit of a disadvantage. I don't know um, how Dr. Singh taught you the Glass Menagerie, and assuming that he taught it. Again, you have to remember, the big disadvantage that I'm at is I don't know what he taught you. I don't know what he covered with you. I don't know how he teaches, and I don't know how he taught you or what he taught you. So if any of this is redundant, you have my apologies. I'm hoping that um, he did spend some time talking about Tennessee Williams himself. But again, I don't know how the work was covered, and I'm assuming that it was covered. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in. Um, Tennessee Williams was probably one of the more well-known playwrights, American playwrights of the 20th century. He wrote The Glass Menagerie, as you all know, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Streetcar Named Desire. Those are just three that pop into my head that he wrote that were all pretty well known. He was, as I recall, originally from St. Louis. But one of the things about Tennessee Williams that is important is he's still considered to be part of what was known as the Southern Gothic movement. And what the Southern Gothic movement, what it sort of encapsulated was that idea that people who lived in the South were kind of backwards. People who lived in the South were a lot of times, the characters were made into kind of twisted and morbid, weird, just people who lived kind of a backwards lifestyle. And, again, one of the things you'll probably hear me say throughout my lectures is that behind every stereotype or behind every joke, there's some truth. There probably is some truth in some of what those Southern Gothic writers were doing. Just to give you, some of the Southern Gothic writers. And again, I don't know if Dr. Singh covered them with you or if he talked about them being quote unquote Southern Gothic. But you should have read Why I Live at the P.O. by Eudora Welty. She was considered to be a Southern Gothic writer. I don't think, well, you may have. William Faulkner, he wrote Barn Burning. I think that's in your anthology. Faulkner was considered to be a Southern Gothic writer. Flannery O'Connor, you definitely should have been taught. I know that because I made the syllabus and I usually tend to make her pretty focal in it. Again, where these characters that are from the South are kind of, they're almost kind of degenerative. And even though Tennessee Williams himself was probably, geographically speaking, I don't know if we consider St. Louis to be the South, but his writing is definitely, by a lot of critics placed into that category. Not everybody has the view of Southerners being like Forrest Gump, where it's this, even though the book and the player or the book and the movie are different. In the book, he's kind of a jerk. In the movie, he's just this sweetheart kind of, slow but nice, well-meaning guy who leads this extraordinary life. That that's not really a Southern Gothic type of experience. So in looking at that aspect of the work, I mean, one of the things to think about is, for example, in reading the Glass Menagerie, I mean, you've got Tom, who is working class. He lives with his mother. His mother is this very domineering former Southern belle who lives in the past. You've got the sister who is probably what we would call, at the very least, socially challenged. Apparently, you know, there are some health issues there too, but at the very least, you know, she's not, she's not exactly, I guess not exactly a Southern belle, which is what the mom wants her to be. Because you have to remember, again, like, the background of the Glass Menagerie is that the mother was a Southern belle. And she had all the gentleman callers, as she refers to them, meaning all her suitors, the men that wanted to date her. And she's pretty much openly ashamed of her daughter, that her daughter doesn't have that. And of course, her problem is she looks at her daughter through a parent's eyes and not through the eyes of, you know, the real world, which is that her daughter, you know, is just not a Southern belle. She's a wallflower. She keeps to herself. She's kind of awkward. She keeps the collection of glass and the collection of the little glass figurines to her. She's very childlike. They're almost like she treats them like friends because she doesn't have any friends. And so what you get is, you know, you've got the older brother there, and I'm just giving you a little bit of backstory on the Glass Menagerie. You've got the older brother there who is actually supposed to, in all likelihood, actually be representative of Tennessee Williams himself, because Tennessee Williams had a sister in his real life who was, I'm trying to think of the right word to use here. Troubled might be the right word. I think she was kind of in and out of mental hospitals, and it took a big toll on him. He never really got over the fact that, you know, his sister was kind of in and out of his life and had to endure the things she had to endure, because she had problems. So a lot of people believe that there's a lot of autobiographical content, particularly in the Glass Menagerie, about Tennessee Williams himself. So Tennessee Williams himself, also kind of an interesting, you know, case study. One of the reasons why alcohol, probably very prevalent in both the Glass Menagerie and A Streetcar Named Desire, Tennessee Williams was an alcoholic. So, you know, you again, people tend to write. Here's a theory of mine. I'm not going to tell you this is across the board true, but people tend to write their best work about stuff they know. You know, again, I mean, if what you know about is partying, you're the best stories you probably are going to tell are the ones about partying. If what you know is how to plant a tomato garden, the best thing you would write is probably about how to plant a tomato garden. So Tennessee Williams, a lot of the things he wrote, they were just very, you know, they had a lot to do with stuff he knew about. Another one of the things about Tennessee Williams that's, I think, an important thing to know about him and his background is he was homosexual. And that probably also impacted the way he wrote. I don't know that I could go into great detail about that, just because Tennessee Williams was never a guy I spent a ton of time reading and studying. I've taught his works since I've started teaching. I've been teaching for 17 years. So I know his works, and I know the works well enough to teach them. But as far as me doing any really, extensive like side work on him, I haven't. Don't claim to have done that. So as far as if someone had any deep, detailed question to ask me about him, I'd be more than happy to try to track it down for you. But chances are I couldn't answer it on the spot. Another interesting thing is actually about how he died. He died accidentally. Again, he was an alcoholic. He was traveling, as I remember. He was in a hotel, and he had some sort of like a glaucoma, or he had some sort of eye problem. And the way a lot of people when they lay in bed, the way a lot of people I would argue, particularly when they're, probably intoxicated, which he was, instead of pulling the dropper out of the bottle, probably at the risk of, having all the liquid fly out, people learn to take it out with their teeth. And, presumably like this was something he had probably done hundreds of times, taking the eyedropper out with his teeth, then giving himself the drops and going to bed. And apparently what had happened was, and I don't know if it was like just the cap to it, but apparently what happened was, he was laying in bed and he went to go put his eye drops in, and he took the cap off with his teeth and he swallowed it, and he actually choked to death on the cap. So at least that's the story that I had always heard. So, I mean, it's kind of an interesting and odd way to go when you think about it. I mean, there's probably any level of irony that goes along with that, but that's not really where I'm going. I just want to give you a little bit of backstory about him in case Dr. Singh didn't tell you anything about him. So you read the Glass Menagerie, presumably you read the Glass Menagerie. Streetcar Named Desire is a different sort of play. If you remember in the Glass Menagerie, that's called a memory play. This one is not a memory play. It also doesn't have anywhere near the sentimentality that the Glass Menagerie does. The Glass Menagerie is a very sentimental sort of play. If you recall at the end, you're basically seeing Tom as the narrator, kind of watching his sister kind of fumble and stumble through life, knowing that he abandoned her and he couldn't do anything to help her. And that's sort of an autobiographical thing for Tennessee Williams. I mean, he couldn't do anything to help his sister. So, right there's where you get that. But you're looking at like A Streetcar Named Desire. I don't know how much autobiographical stuff you're getting there. If you've been reading it or you've begun reading it, you can see that Stanley Kowalski, the main character, is just he's not a nice person. He's very, in his own way, even though I don't think you're supposed to think he's some sort of genius, in his own way, he's very conniving. He's very, in his own way. And again, I think the way he's described actually kind of allows him to be this way, but in his own way, he's kind of manipulative. He's kind of, I don't know the word to use off the top of my head, but someone who knows how to take advantage of a situation. Pardon me, someone who, he's kind of, I guess maybe the best way to describe him is he's kind of street smart. He kind of knows how to read people. It's not like he's somebody who spent his life reading like textbooks or that he's overly educated. It's just that he sort of, gets it. He sort of gets what's going on. And like I said, I'm only going to take you up to Act 5 in this lecture, because again, you got to remember, I'm teaching you for 3 weeks. So in all likelihood, what I'll do is I'll post this lecture tomorrow. The second half of the play, I'll post that lecture on Thursday or Friday, And then the following week, that's what the time you'll have to work on your assignment for me. Again, just look on Moodle. You'll see everything's been put there. And then Dr. Wong is going to take over after I'm done. I hope after I'm done, you all will be, satisfied that I came in and did what I could. It's hard to jump into a class. You don't know really what the person before you has done, and to teach it for 3 weeks. I mean, I feel like it's a little snippet. It's hard to gain much continuity in 3 weeks, but I'm doing what I can. And I hope that, you walk away feeling like, I did a decent job. Sorry, like I said, I'm going to be getting emails periodically. Everybody keeps dropping email bombs on me. So we've got the character again. One of the ways I like to start sometimes looking at things is with the characters. We've got Stella, who is sort of like the prototypical sort of submissive housewife type. Also, again, a former Southern belle. When you hear Blanche talking about Belle Reve, what you hear, what you should be thinking of is it's like a plantation. Her family, at one point in time anyway, were apparently wealthy people that owned a plantation. And this does take place in New Orleans. I mean, so it takes place in the South. I mean, again, that's why probably people would argue that Tennessee Williams' works are Southern Gothic. And the people in him now, Stanley Kowalski, yes, he's Polish by descent, but that doesn't mean he can't fit into that Southern Gothic framework either. I mean, let's face it. I was giving a lecture in another one of my classes, about America's a melting pot. I mean, just because your last name's Kowalski doesn't mean that you don't have, generations that came before you that lived in the South or lived in America. Okay. So again, I mean, you probably shouldn't be thinking this guy got on a boat from Poland and came over to New Orleans. I mean, in short, he's probably not like a first generation Polish immigrant. Okay. Then you've got Blanche, and Blanche from the beginning of this play. I mean, you guys ought to be able to sense it. She's troubled. I mean, people who are the types of things she does, even in the opening scene, like, she goes in the guy's house, pours herself a glass of liquor, drinks it down. Then when her sister comes home, she acts like she hasn't done that and asks for more liquor, drinks it down. And then, when Stanley comes in and Blanche has gone out to run an errand, Stella has gone out to run an errand, Stanley asks her if he can get her something to drink. And she says, well, no, I really don't drink, but okay, if you want to give me a drink, I'll take it. So what I'm getting at is, like, we have somebody here who's, tossing back drinks and basically denying that she's doing it with any real, this is not like somebody sitting on their back porch drinking a beer or even sipping a drink. This is somebody who's like whacking down straight liquor to get a buzz. Okay. Again, autobiographical stuff. Tennessee Williams, probably behavior that he exercised. Okay. Again, like, that's what I'm getting at is that's alcoholic behavior. That's not social drinking. That's not casual drinking. That's drinking to get drunk drinking. Okay. And so these are your main three characters. You have some ancillary people that are going to come kind of in and out, but those are the main three you want to be focusing on. Let's start, and I just took some notes. One of the things that again, I don't just want to say Southern Gothic works, but a lot of probably more than any American literature of the 20th century works tended to do was look at people's ethnicity and make what we would probably call pretty startling judgments about it. For example, if you remember when you read at the beginning of this play, one of the characters is simply Negro woman, and the basic way she's characterized is her speech. Her speech is what we would call, again, I don't throw out a whole lot of literary terms when I teach intro to lit. Unless I'm actually teaching a course on ground, then I will give quizzes and stuff on terms. But what she's characterized by is her dialect. That's what that's called. Whenever, instead of a character saying you're right, it's you right, something like that. That's dialect. Okay. So basically what I'm getting at is it's almost kind of a racist way of portraying a character without being racist. Another place where you see that sort of judgment come in is whenever Blanche is asking Stella about Stanley and she hears his last name. Well, people who know, name origins and last names that end with SKI are almost always Polish names, or that area of the globe, but most likely Polish. So she says something to her like, he's Polish. And then Stella says he's Polish, and Blanche says something like, Polish, aren't they like the Irish, but less refined? Well, the stereotype of the Irish has always been how barbaric they are. How they're basically one step above being almost animals. Interesting side note, there was a book written in the 20th century, actually may have been even after this play was written. I think it was written, I want to say in the late 40s or early 50s, called How the Irish Became White. The Irish people weren't even considered white for a very long time. And so to say that Stanley's a member of an ethnic group that's below the Irish, I mean, that's at that time, I mean, that's a pretty low blow. She's basically saying, man, he's not even that refined. Like that's, and if you notice when you read this, Stanley's referred to a lot of times as an animal or a beast or being very beastly. Now, I realize like in our lexicon, we hear about that and we're like, man, that dude's a beast. That's not being, and we mean it complimentarily. Like, who are the two boxers that recently had a fight? Tyson Fury and the other guy. I don't really follow boxing very closely, but the one guy just obliterated the other guy, and people were saying, "Oh man, he's a beast." Well, and maybe it was Tyson Fury they were talking about. I don't remember, but what I mean is they mean that in a complimentary way. It doesn't mean that in this play. When you're reading that and they're talking about him being a beast and him being, animal-like, it's an insult. It means basically like he's a savage, like he doesn't have any manners. It's like, if you own a pet, right? Okay. I just witnessed this earlier, of course, while I was eating. My wife has cats. Those of you who had me before, if you've had me before as a teacher, I'm not a big cat person. While I'm in the middle of eating, I looked and saw the cat licking itself. Okay. Obviously, you know what I mean by that. Like, that's animalistic behavior. Okay. Basically, what she's saying is like Stanley is one step above being that way. Okay. If you look at page, again, and like I said, I have my notes here. If you look at page 21 of the play, and I'm going to go back and look because I just have my notes written down about what I was looking at. Yeah, page 21 is just basically a good description of that. He's of medium height, 5 feet 8, 5 feet 9, strongly and compactly built. Animal joy in his being is implicit in all his movements and attitudes. Since earliest manhood, the center of his life has been pleasure with women, the giving and taking of it, not with weak indulgence, dependency, but with the power and pride of a richly feathered male bird among hens. Again, just listening to that description, what you can see is a bird among hens. Okay. I mean, it's the way he's described is he's being paralleled with an animal. And that's not flattering. Again, like that's not a flattering depiction. What you're supposed to think of almost is that like he's insatiable, like he can't control himself for as long as he can remember. Everything, about his being is animalistic. Like again, it's like I hate to, again, I don't want to be vulgar. There's an old saying about like dogs. The only thing dogs know how to do is eat, crap, and screw. They don't know anything else. They don't know, they just don't. That's all their being consists of. Well, I mean, that's kind of how Stanley's being described here, almost like a dog. He, all he's ever known since he's been old enough to know it is basically what we would call the visceral pleasures, things that, are physically satisfying. For him, probably, being drunk, having sexual relations, things that bring him some kind of physical pleasure they're cardinal to him. That's, he's very primitive. They're cardinal to him. The intellectual pursuits, that's not anything that he's concerned with. Okay. Another thing that's interesting in this play, and I do believe it was at one point in time a reality, is on page 24 of your play. You're going to hear Stanley. He starts talking about the Napoleonic Code, and essentially all that he's talking about is basically that when you married somebody, it was sort of like of a mutual benefit. If, for instance, I married my wife and I had $50,000 in savings, my wife was as entitled to that $50,000 as I was, and vice versa. Now, I don't know that he has the Napoleonic Code exactly correct because I don't know enough about it. But what you're supposed to be thinking is basically that, again, that conniving, I'm always kind of looking out for myself and my own best interests. What can I get out of this whole thing? And you'll also notice another thing that he tends to do a lot of during these scenes is he says, well, I have a buddy I'll get to look over this. I have a friend I'll get who's an expert on this. Like when he's going through Blanche's trunk, he's convinced that she's pulled some sort of scam where either she sold their plantation and got money for it, or she's hoarding money. He's convinced that all the stuff in her trunk is really valuable, and Stella tries to tell him, like, Stanley, this necklace is costume jewelry. It's like these are like glass beads. They're not worth anything. And Stanley's like, well, I have a friend who's a jeweler. I'll get him to check these out. In other words, like, he doesn't necessarily claim to be an expert, but he's very accusatory about what exactly her position is in society. What exactly is it that she's done that's brought her there? Because if she lived on this big plantation and she comes from all this money, why is she coming there to stay with them in a little 2-bedroom, 3-bed, or not little 2-bedroom, like a little 2-3-room apartment? And you have to think from Stanley's vantage point, like, to most of us, that wouldn't add up. Like, at the risk of sounding mean here, my wife's sister, my sister-in-law, we're not nuts about each other. I wouldn't want her coming and living in my house, especially if I felt like she had somewhere else she could go. And I realize some of you may go, damn, Dr. Drew, that's harsh. But I think my own wife's sister would admit that. And I don't think my wife would want her sister to come here and live here. And that's not to say that my wife and her don't get along. What I just mean is I don't think we would want to be taking on a boarder. And I think that's kind of what he's looking at is like, why is this lady here? And what makes him ultra curious is that they come for money. So suddenly this woman that was living comfortably and had a job as a teacher and all this is here. What happened? Did the wheels fall off the car here? What's the cause of all this? So he's very suspicious. Okay. One of the things also that I want you to recognize about this work, I put an article, and it's very short, but I think you'll get something from it. That's why I put it on there. I'm not trying to kill you guys with reading. Like I said, I've got you for 3 weeks. I don't need to do that. That's why I'm kind of trying to divide up the reading and the viewings. Tennessee Williams was writing probably around the time that the literary era known as modernity was coming to an end. Okay. If I remember correctly, and again, this is out of my area of expertise, I think the period of American literary modernity started in about 1914, because I think it started at the start of the First World War, and I think it ended around 1945 because that's when the Second World War ended. I think it was about a 30-year, movement. Now you got to remember, again, like I tell all my students, at the time these guys were writing, they weren't calling themselves modernists. Somebody went back later on, and that's what the writing was called. Okay, but modernism, it's a literary movement, and it's like any other one. It's comprised of certain traits. One of the traits with modernity that some people like and some people really don't, it probably depends just kind of how your mind is built, is dialogue and the way it's exercised in a modern work of literature as compared to somebody like Shakespeare, who was writing in a very, even though Shakespeare was the first guy who wrote in like modern English, he wasn't writing in a period of modernity. If you read Shakespeare, what you're going to see is, long, what they called soliloquies. Soliloquies were like when a guy would give a speech or be talking to somebody, and literally, this is true. Like you can look in your textbook has Hamlet in it. I usually teach Hamlet when I teach intro to lit, because I think it's good to teach a Shakespeare play. And I think Hamlet is the best one, or at least one of them. You'll notice that characters sometimes have dialogue, like one person has a, a line, I don't want to call it a verse. In Shakespeare, it's a verse, but we could call it, a speaking part that in Shakespeare, sometimes, it's a page long. And what the modernist writers were trying to do was to get away from that idea. They were trying to, whenever they wrote dialogue, they were trying to write dialogue that sounded more like the way people actually talk to each other. So when you read this play, if it feels, the word that they would use, it would be fragmented. If it feels fragmented because there's lots of like very quick one word exchanges and fast moving dialogue, that's intentional. Okay. I don't know that Tennessee Williams is considered a modernist writer per se, but I think you could definitely put at least this work. I'd have to go back and look at the Glass Menagerie and look at the dialogue more, but I think this work definitely fits into the modernity style. And I think another thing that makes it fit into the modernity style is a lot of the things that were topical for those writers was the idea that things were hopeless. Things were bad because what they were largely writing through and about were the perspectives of people before, during, and after wars, major world wars. And think about right now. We've got this COVID-19 going around, and look at the responses it's garnering from people. I mean, it's going from people who seemingly don't care, who are, they're not going to follow the protocol of staying at home. They're going to go out. They're going to do whatever they feel like doing the way they would have if there wasn't a pandemic going on. And if they get sick, then their attitude probably is, well, I'm not going to get sick. But if they get sick, then so be it. Then you have people who not only are they staying at home, but they're going out and they're hoarding, supplies and hoarding things, thinking that they're going to be holed up in their homes for the next year because this pandemic is never going to go away, and it's going to kill everybody like the Great Plague did. What I'm getting at is, during times of confusion and strife and panic and anger and worry and concern, people's behavior not only becomes erratic, but a lot of times it becomes irrational and sometimes very mercenary. And I think you see a lot of that in the Glass Menagerie. In A Streetcar Named Desire. I don't want to go to the ending yet. That's talked about in the article that I put on Moodle about how this particular author thinks that the biggest reason that this play fits the grand scheme of modernity is because the way it ends. That's this writer's argument. I'm going to leave you to read the article, but this author believes that the main reason why it fits that schematic of being a modernist work is the way it ends. So I don't want to give away the ending yet, but I did want to make sure I talked about that because the dialogue is fragmented for a reason too. You're supposed to think that, a lot of these scenes are pretty chaotic. Anytime you get a bunch of guys together playing cards, drinking, being macho, you're gonna have that sort of chaos going on. And when you throw into the mix, the fact that one of these guys is a severely alpha male who really doesn't mind abusing and mistreating women. And then you've got two women there who are pretty much at his disposal to, blow up at if he feels like he wants to do that. It only adds to the chaos. So again, that's one of the reasons why the dialogue in this play is boom, 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 because it's supposed to be, you're supposed to be able to almost kind of, not that you guys are big, heavy drinkers. You shouldn't be. Not that you guys are big, heavy partiers. You shouldn't be. Not that you guys are gamblers. You shouldn't be. What I'm saying is, if you can envision that kind of scenario, that's the kind of dialogue you'd envision. You wouldn't envision somebody sitting there in the middle of a poker game giving a speech like King Henry VIII would in a Shakespeare play. It wouldn't fit. It wouldn't be realistic. And that's another thing modernity was shooting for, was being realistic, using realism. Okay. Page 48, I also have in my notes, and I want to scroll through and just look at because I'm not sure exactly what I did to take the note. Let's see. Let's see. I'm sorry, it's taking me a second to see what, because I'm not sure exactly what I was. 47 and 48. I wrote the wrong page number down there. Basically, the way Stella is describing Stanley is that she's with him because of his sexual prowess and not anything else. And it's pretty well described that way, probably in as, bold of terms as it could be without being profane. I mean, really, it's dancing around being profane. Um, I'm not going to read it off of there. You guys can read it. It's pages 47 and 48 on the link I gave you. But again, where I'm going with that is, I think you should. We believe me, I'm not defending the character of Stanley. But I think one thing we also need to remember too is Stella knew what she was getting into here, marrying this guy. I mean, it's not like they met on Match.com on a Friday and 2 weeks later they got married. That's not. I don't think that's the impression you're supposed to walk away with. She knew what she was getting with this guy. And vice versa. I think you're supposed to know Stanley married her because he thought she had money. I think that's a big thing you probably should have in the back of your head, and that's why when Blanche shows up, suddenly things seem a little less like paradise there, don't they? I mean, do you notice at the beginning before Blanche is there, or at least before Stanley starts suspecting that there's something amiss with the money? Do you notice how well Stella and Stanley get along? They get along fine. Everything's hunky-dory until he starts getting curious about that money. And then the monkey wrench gets thrown into it. Well, why is she here? What's up with that money? In one of my gender studies classes, we're talking about how money tends to be one of those things that breaks up a lot of relationships. Why does that happen? Well, I mean, it's a pretty obvious question when you think about it. I mean, especially like if Stanley's the one out there working and bringing home the cheddar and Stella's not working. And the reason why Stanley is out there bringing home the bacon, you like all these different cliches I'm using here? He's bringing home the bacon. Presumably one of the reasons he's doing that is because he's waiting on the payoff. You understand what I mean? Like, it's almost like, in his mind, this ain't free. This ain't, my labor ain't free. I'm going out and working and getting paid and bringing home the money and paying the bills because I know what you've got in your back pocket. And if I do what I'm supposed to do all along, if everything goes the way it's supposed to, I'm going to get what you got in your back pocket. And then when Blanche shows up and he realizes they don't have nothing in their back pocket, things start to get a little hairy, don't they? Okay. I mean, that's an obvious explanation. We all know money, money makes the world go round. I mean, we all know that's true, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's the most important thing, but it definitely makes the world go round. And without it, the one thing about money is it's like a tool. There are certain things only money can do. It's sort of like if I'm a carpenter, and I need to cut a piece of wood and all I have is a hammer, I don't have the tool I need. Well, there are certain things in this world that the only tool that's going to get you those things is money. And you can tell, Stanley's got big dreams. Stanley wants more than he has. And he thinks that the meal ticket to get it is his wife's family inheritance. So again, I'm not trying to keep repeating myself, but when Blanche shows up, this becomes an issue because he starts to become concerned about what exactly is going on here. Why is it that she's here? He starts to suspect, I almost cursed, oh crap, they don't have any money. If they did, why is she here? And that's why he's going through all her stuff. And, he doesn't know nothing about nothing. I mean, he doesn't know nothing about it. That'd be like me looking at a fake diamond and acting like I know the difference between it and a real diamond. I mean, if you gave me a cubic zirconia and a diamond, I probably would be loath to tell the difference. My point is, he's the same way. He just acts like he knows more than he does. He's a macho man. Okay. Like Macho Man. Oh yeah. Randy Savage. Not that you all know who Macho Man is, but anyway, I digress. So, one of the other things that, I noticed too, let me look here real quick. Make sure this isn't of any relevance. All right. I'm not getting anything there. One of the things that was also kind of funny, if you remember, when you read The Importance of Being Earnest, for one thing, I don't want to say nobody. I try not to speak in absolutes, but in our world today, yes, lots of people still smoke, but not very many people carry around like cigarette cases with them anymore. Well, intriguingly, if you remember in The Importance of Being Earnest, one of you guys actually wrote about this in one of your responses about how the cigarette case had the inscription in it, and it was from Cecily, or I think it was. I'm bad with names. I have to be looking at something. It was Cecily, I think, who had written it to Jack, and she called herself, from your niece or something. And Jack was trying to play it off like it was his mother had given him that cigarette case. And Algernon had read the inscription and was like, well, how often does someone's mother refer to them as their niece? And it's just funny to think of people carrying around these cigarette cases that had inscriptions in them. And what you see is there's a cigarette on page 52. The cigarette case is described. It says, and if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. And Mitch, who Blanche seems to think is a little bit better socially than his friends, and Stella says the same thing. I don't know if that's supposed to mean because he's educated or maybe he's more intelligent. Again, I'm not exactly sure what makes her jump to that conclusion, but apparently he had a cigarette inscription, a case in his, a cigarette inscription, an inscription in his cigarette case that was a quote from one of her favorite poems. And you have to remember she taught English. And so, I guess it makes him look like a higher caliber person, but it's still one of those things where it's funny that in both these plays we're looking at, that a cigarette case and an inscription in it could play such a vital role in a plot, but it somehow it does. I mean, again, like I said, I don't know that I've ever seen somebody in my 40 years who had a cigarette case. I mean, mostly it's just a pack. You see people carry around. I mean, like I said, I'm sure there are people who carry them around. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody carry one around. Another thing that I thought was funny, and I think that, she's expressing her own perspective of teaching English. And I don't think necessarily she's speaking just for somebody who teaches English, but I think she's speaking, about how frustrating it can be just to be a teacher sometimes, where what she says is, I have the misfortune of being an English instructor. I attempt to instill a bunch of Bobby Soxers and drugstore Romeos with reverence for Hawthorne, Whitman, and Poe. And I think what she basically is saying is, here I am trying to get a bunch of high schoolers. That's what she means by Bobby Soxers and drugstore Romeos, meaning like Bobby Soxers are they were like little socks that girls in like the 50s would have worn, like cheerleaders, would have worn a little, like what they call Bobby socks. And drugstore Romeos would probably have meant, guys who sit at like the counter in the drugstore, because it used to be like drugstores weren't like they are now. They used to have like soda fountains in them and stuff, and people would go there and hang out. And so she's talking about basically I'm trying to teach a bunch of teenagers to appreciate fine poetry, and it's a waste of my life, is what she's saying. And I think it's more just that, again, Mitch responds, I guess that some of them are more interested in other things. And she says, how very right you are. Their literary heritage is not what most of them treasure above all else. Well, that's like me teaching this class. I would not expect any of you guys to go major in English because I did such a great job teaching this class. If you did, I'd be like, hey, that's awesome. Great. Thank you. That's a compliment. But what I'm saying is I don't think most teachers go into their job with that attitude. And I think if they do, they learn very quickly. That's the wrong attitude to have. especially in high school, you have to remember, like, there's also one big difference between high schoolers and you guys. You guys have chosen consciously, I presume, consciously chosen to pursue a higher education. In high school, you don't have a choice. In high school, I mean, if you don't go to school, sooner or later, the truant officer comes by your house and you can, it's usually the parent can go to jail if their kid isn't going to school. So, you guys sort of, I believe it was up until the age of 16, if in Virginia anyway, it was when I was in high school, and then you can drop out if you want to. At least that's how it used to be. I'm twice you guys' age. I'm just going on how it used to be. But if you weren't 16 and you were still enrolled in school, you had to go. And then, like I said, sooner or later they would send what was called the truant officer to your house to come get you, or to give your parent a citation because you were expected to be in school. What I'm getting at is that idea that and she already seems a little bit fragile anyway. One of the things that I think you're supposed to be getting that idea about is that, she's, begun to realize that, most of her students, they don't really care about, they don't really care about her teaching them English. Like and most of us, like I said, we come to realize that when we teach our classes, like when I teach freshman comp, guys, I mean, I know any of you guys in this class, chances are you had to take freshman comp. And whether you had me or you had someone else, here's the safe money is you didn't want to be in there. I get it. But at the same time, you can't take it personally. I mean, you guys end up when you get your schedule, you end up kind of where you end up. And if you end up in my class and again, you like it, hey, great. I would love it if everyone I came across loved me, but I'm also not naive enough to think that's the truth either. Okay. And again, I think that's another problem that Blanche actually has. I think she thinks that, anyone who comes across her is going to think she's charming, she's great, she's this, that, and the other thing. And Stanley, he ain't so sold on her. Okay. Finally, where I wanted to end was close to the end of the reading. Page 71. And 72, basically what she's saying is, she being Blanche, is, Stella, I can't believe you left our great plantation, our great abode, to come live here in this dump with these lowlifes, basically is what she's saying. So, I mean, again, I don't want to condemn Blanche. Here's probably the best way to end for today, because I'm coming up on 55 minutes. Here's the best way to probably end this. We're all a byproduct of where we come from and what we see and what we know. We're all a byproduct of that. And we're probably supposed to think that Blanche, Stella, they're a byproduct of a better sort of background than probably what Stanley came from. And the problem with Blanche is, and I think Stanley is very old school in this way. My dad was very old school in this way. Here's the whole thing. A man's house is his kingdom. A man's house is his castle. And if you come into a man's house and you insult him, don't be surprised if he asks you to leave. Okay. And again, this is not to defend Stanley and it's not to attack Blanche. I don't want you guys thinking I'm taking sides, because I'm not. I'm being devil's advocate here. There's a lot of truth in what Blanche says, at least about how Stanley and his friends act. They probably are a pretty coarse crew. I mean, they probably are. You get the impression that there's some pretty heavy drinkers. They're pretty hard livers. And their amusements are probably what a lot of people would think of as being lowbrow. They get together, they crank up some tunes, they drink some beers, drink liquor, smoke cigarettes, play cards. You know, a lot of people would say that's pretty lowbrow. Okay. Some people might not. Again, I'm not attacking it or placing it on a pedestal, but that's her observation. But at the same time, here's the problem with that. Stanley's house. I mean, again, if he wants to go in there and flip over the furniture and kick a hole in the wall, it's his house. I mean, he has a right to do that. And when you go into a man's house, and I'm saying that not genderized, I mean, when you go into a person's house who owns it, you should not be coming in there like you own the place yourself and condemning that person and or telling them how to act. And that's kind of where Blanche, I think, loses the plot a little bit herself, is she feels like she's better than them and she has a right to kind of rub that in their face. And so we have basically right here, as I come to the end of the lecture, we've established already what that conflict is going to be. I mean, the conflict is mostly going to be Blanche and Stanley. That's going to be your key, your key conflict. Is Stella going to play a role in that? Yes. I mean, again, I've read this. I'm not going to give away things, but yes, she's going to play a role in it. But the key conflict is Blanche and Stanley, and that Blanche doesn't really know her place as far as Stanley is concerned. And as far as Blanche is concerned, Stanley's not good enough to be with her sister and good enough to be a part of their family, even though now they don't have anything. So that's sort of where we're going into scene 5. Okay. Like I said, this was up to scene 5. So again, keep up with your reading, stay healthy, look out for each other, do the right things. I know you all are. And hopefully these lectures help you some. And I hope you're getting through the work okay. I'm not trying to pour it on you. I'm just trying to do what I can to be fair and be able to get attendance for 3 weeks. And then, like I said, you won't have to deal with me anymore. If you don't, like what I'm doing, you can go, okay, I only have one more week or whatever. So at any rate, I'm doing my best. I hope these help. And on that note, I will end things. And if you have any questions and or comments or opinions, just email me and let me know. Okay.